Dave, you look great. Thanks for making me look like crap. You're the first person I've seen wearing a jacket in about 2 months.
I
Uh,
thought I'd keep it professional. I'm on a book tour. I got to look. This is the closest thing I have to an author's jacket.
yeah, well, I've got my best sweatshirt on and I'm totally wearing pants. Tell me, what is it like doing a virtual book tour? I guess it's not the kind of book tour you were expecting to do.
Yeah, I got to tell you, it's really bizarre, actually. The book came out on Tuesday, April 28th, and I was supposed to be in New York the week before doing all kinds of press, going on every TV show you can imagine, and meeting with the publishers and all that good stuff. And then I was supposed to be on a book tour starting that night. We were going to be at the Gramercy Theater in New York, and then I think I was going to be in DC yesterday, and then across the country for the next month and a half or so. And instead, I'm in my garage. I mean, this is my garage. I happen to have a studio in my garage, so it's kind of funny. We're seeing all these CNN anchors in their kitchens and their living rooms and things. I was a little ahead on the home studio thing, so I've got a nice professional setup here, which is great. And there's a certain convenience to it, in that I can do this all from here. But I guess it's missing a little something. Well, I mean, talking to a person eye to eye always adds a little something else to the conversation. But I've enjoyed this, and in many ways, it's allowed me to do more than I was going to be able to do, because I can basically just every day for the last 4 or 5 days. This morning I started literally at 6 a.m. and I go till about 8 p.m. with just minor breaks and maybe lunch if I'm lucky. I'm happy to talk to people. I'm glad the book's being well received, and you do what you got to do.
All right, well, let's talk about the book. I know originally this book, as I think you confess, it was supposed to be kind of a roadmap of your own departure from the left side of the political spectrum. I know that it was an accumulation of things, but what was there one event or issue that really made you question whether you belonged on the left side of the political spectrum?
Yeah, so the original title of the book was Why I Left the Left, which is the title of a very popular PragerU video that I did that has about 20 million views or so. And everyone has or many people I should say, have just sort of prescribed that to me, that I'm sort of the left guy. I talk about the regressive left, and that the left is no longer liberal. That's very much in the sort of mix, the stew of things that I've been talking about for the last 5 years or so. And I started writing that book. And then I quickly realized, I was like, I don't know if I want to write a book about just what I'm against or what I was. I want to write a book about what I'm for. And that really became Don't Burn This Book. But I lay out 3 moments in the book that were my seminal wake-up moments. And I won't give you all 3. I'll give you one of them. You may know David Webb, who is a conservative commentator on SiriusXM Patriot Channel. He guest hosts on Fox News all the time. And years ago, when I was a lefty, I was on the Young Turks. We were watching a clip of Fox News, and David Webb came on, and suddenly they were saying all the worst things about him. He was just talking about some basic conservative beliefs. Doesn't even matter what he was talking about specifically, but suddenly they were calling him an Uncle Tom and a sellout and a race traitor and just all of the worst things that you could say about somebody. And what they didn't know was that a few years before, I had a show on SiriusXM, and although I was a lefty and David Webb was on the right, we met in the hall one day. We started chatting. I used to go on his show every week, and we'd debate topics, and then we'd go downstairs and have a steak and have some whiskey, and we were good, even though we disagreed on almost everything. But I knew him to be a good man and forthright and a passionate advocate for his positions. It wasn't some fake thing. And yet here they were, the supposed tolerant people, the people who love diversity, and they were suddenly seeing a black man, and just because he didn't think the way they want black people to think, he was the bad guy. He was all the worst things you could say about somebody. And because I knew him, it suddenly became so stark, so clear to me that, when we think of racism, we think, oh, that you're racist, you don't want those people using a water fountain, something like that, which obviously is racist. But there's a new pernicious racism, which is that you say you're for groups, meaning I'm for gays, I'm for blacks, I'm for women, but you can't be for groups because, believe it or not, black people think all sorts of different things. Gay people think all sorts of different things. Women think all sorts of different things. And to watch a group of supposedly tolerant people be angry at a black man who just thought differently than them, I realized was a new sort of, in many ways, systemic racism. And I say systemic because it's sort of spread throughout all of the left. And even right now, Harvard discriminates against Asian people because they had too many Asian people, by their measure, being admitted to the university.
So I guess what we're talking about here, to a certain extent, it falls into the category of reverse racism or progressive racism. But you must have faced the critique of people saying, hey, there's still a lot of old-fashioned racism on the right. Uh, have you had people criticize the book on the basis that, we don't have the luxury of talking about this sort of art house leftist racism when there's still so much, as they see it, bigotry on the conservative side of the spectrum?
No, honestly, well, first off, I don't see that. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a KKK. There are some marginal white supremacy groups or the Westboro Baptist Church or something like that, that actually only have any traction because anytime they do any stupid little thing that, of course, is abhorrent or whatever, the media goes crazy with it. You know what I mean? Does David Duke exist? Of course, David Duke exists. Does he have any influence in any way whatsoever? Of course not. So I don't see actual bigotry out of the conservative side or on the right. But I do see it almost everywhere on the left. The left has become obsessed with identity, obsessed with gender and sexuality and the color of skin. And I wouldn't even call that reverse racism. I would call that racism. If you rail all day long against white Christian men because they're white Christian men, that's racism. It's not reverse racism. So I don't see it on the right. I mean, I know there's this sort of misnomer out there. And by the way, a lot of lefties, I think when I woke up and I started realizing, oh, the conservatives aren't so bad, the libertarians are actually kind of cool, there's something nice happening here. It takes a while to go, oh, all of those people who I thought were racist, they're not racist, they're not bad guys, but I never see it. I mean, and again, I'm saying this in terms of, I'm not saying that there are no racist people on either side of the political aisle. Of course there are. But I think what the left does is they see racism almost everywhere except where it really is. They're looking for it constantly, so they have to find it. And just because you believe in low taxes doesn't mean you're a racist. Just because you believe that America should have a strong border doesn't mean you're a racist. And the litany of other things. So I just don't see it on the other side.
Now, to a certain extent, your book is written as advice to avoid the pitfalls of people leaving the left. What kind of pitfalls are there? Anecdotally, I've noticed that there are leftists who've become disgusted with progressive orthodoxy, and sometimes they will lapse into other political cults. What are the pitfalls you've seen from leftists who've made the migration to the center?
Yeah, so this is really what a good chunk of the book is, because I think actually the biggest sort of growing political movement or political ideology in America right now is the disaffected liberal, which is what I would say that I am. I am a true liberal, and I lay out what classical liberalism is, which of course is about individual rights, meaning everyone that's a legal citizen of any country should be treated equally under the law, and then basically laissez-faire economics, light touch of government when you need it. That's pretty much what my belief system is. That's very live and let live, and we could talk about the marginal differences between that and libertarianism. As far as the pitfalls, well, I lay out some of the things that I guarantee will happen to you if you leave the left, or not even leave the left. Once you start questioning it, because if you remember 4 or 5 years ago, when I started talking about my frustrations with the left, I was always saying we. I was saying we guys, we the left have abandoned liberalism. We have to fix liberalism. We have to stand for the things that we're supposed to stand for, like free speech and open inquiry, and not deplatforming speakers and destroying people. These are liberal principles. So I was doing this from the left. And what I think a lot of people see right now, that I'm trying to give them the courage, I suppose, to be able to walk and not be destroyed, is that once you pick one position that is counter to whatever mainstream leftist orthodoxy is of the day, if you don't check all of those 10 boxes, they will eliminate you, and they will try to mob you on social media. They will go after your employer. You will watch friends and family members turn on you and call you all of the worst things. And even if you say, no, those are none of my beliefs, well, then they'll move the goalposts and try to extrapolate something else on you. So what I'm trying to show people, well, I'll give you one of the very important tips that I give people is, don't apologize unless you genuinely have done something wrong. I'm not saying never apologize. We've all wronged people. We've all done things that are wrong. So you can apologize if it's earnest. But I think a lot of times, and we see this when the mob comes after celebrities all the time, a celebrity will say something that everyone knows is basically right. You may remember Mario Lopez said that, we shouldn't be, something to the effect of, we shouldn't be transitioning kids who are 4 years old, gender transition. And it's like, everyone knows that's the truth. That's not anti-trans, but we might want to wait till they're a little bit older, and we could discuss all of that stuff. But he got mobbed, and then what does he do? He basically issues a faux apology, even though we know he doesn't really apologize. He doesn't really feel any contrition about what he said. Another one would be when a Hollywood actor who I'm sort of friendly with, Mark Duplass, he basically tweeted out something to the effect that said, Ben Shapiro is not the devil. He just has different political thoughts. He got mobbed and then deleted the tweet and issued an apology. And it's like, once you do that, once you apologize for something you're not sorry for, well, now they've got their foot on your neck forever, and you will never get up, and they're using that power over you. So one of the things you can do is be brave and stand up for what you believe. And I think if more of us start doing it, we can actually silence that mob.
So it's interesting because when people talked about book burning or censorship, that kind of thing, 20 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago, we primarily would have been talking about government control of what we can say.
Or from the right. That is true. Let's not forget, it was mostly people on the right who were going for violent video games. Remember, they were trying to ban Mortal Kombat from the shelves. So these things are cyclical, and I'm glad you brought it up because it's an important point.
But also it was a government phenomenon to some extent. I noticed that in our conversation, you're talking primarily about crowdsourced forms of censorship. Is this something that you've been following? Do you have any section in your book, which I haven't read the entire book, where you talk about the threat from government, or are you primarily talking about crowdsourced forms of censorship within professional and social networks?
Yeah, it's a great question. A few years ago, I started saying I'm far more worried that we're silencing ourselves than the government is silencing us. Now, I should say, obviously, I'm talking about this from an American perspective because we have the First Amendment, which gives us protections about speech that, really almost every Western nation doesn't have and is jealous of. I mean, there are things in Canada, there are things all over Europe that you guys are not protected in ways, in ways that we are. As far as the government coming for speech right now, I'm not completely worried about it at the moment. Now, of course, it could happen. So let's be very clear about that. We should always be wary of the government silencing dissent, silencing speech, and I have sort of concerns that go across the board that always stay there. But at the moment, I mean, you can think about it this way: Donald Trump can tweet whatever he wants, and then what happens? The first 100 people that respond to him are usually blue check journalists or actors or activists, all telling him he's a Nazi, he's Hitler, he's going to burn in hell. I mean, the worst things you can imagine. And guess what? Nobody knocks on their door. The Gestapo doesn't show up to drag them off to the gulag. I mean, there's no version of any of that. Now, if the government right now, so we're in coronavirus right now, we have an interesting situation going on because, if I was to start telling people they don't have to socially distance and you should get out there without a mask and gloves and all of that, could the government start infringing on my free speech? Well, that could be a worry. So it's not something that I'm not worried about, broadly speaking. It's not something I'm specifically worried about now. The bigger worry to me is that we are doing it to ourselves. That is separate than the government, and it's an important distinction.